Hello and welcome back to Explaining Acro. I'm Ben and this is Cassandra, and today we're going to be teaching you one of the most iconic skills in Acro, the Dirty Dancing lift, also known as Standing Bird.
This is a fun skill, it's accessible, and it's a crowd pleaser. Everyone goes crazy for it when it comes out on the dance floor. And with all of that being said, it's also fairly dangerous when learning if you don't have the proper technique and progressions. And this is because the flyer's head is over empty space behind the base. So these videos can be found online of people falling from this skill. And we're not going to show any today, but it just highlights that this can be dangerous. So please treat this skill with respect, follow these progressions, and trust your skill level and ability, and can't wait to see.
The first thing that we want to do is to talk about the grip. With the grip, I'm looking for a couple different things, but the first thing is just the orientation of my hands. So rather than having my hands out to the side, I like to have them so that my index finger is pointing up towards the flyer's head. The reason for this is this gives me the ability to control the pitch of the flyer's body much more easily because I have a longer lever and I'm able to push through this knuckle in order to prevent them from falling towards their head. The second thing that I'm doing is I'm looking to position my hand, and particularly the base of my hand, somewhere along the bony crest of the flyer's hip. That exact positioning is going to depend a little bit on the relative weight distribution of the flyer with respect to upper body and lower body, so you're going to have to negotiate that a little bit. But ideally, I'm feeling some nice bone in the base of my hand and the base of this index knuckle, and I'm able to push using my fingers.
The arms in this skill really impact the balance. For today, we are starting with the hands on the wrist, and we like to do bird with arms out to the side. And this is just allowing for the least amount of movement for the balance. You can also do arms above your head or down by your side as an artistic choice, but we typically don't recommend that just because it changes where the weight is, making it more top heavy or more bottom heavy.
Before we start working on doing the skill overhead, we like to practice with the base on their back. This does a couple things. So first, it lets the flyer get some comfort in just holding this position without freaking out. And as bases, it allows us to get a bit of practice balancing the skill when the flyer is able to just put their hands on the ground and save things if things go wonky instead of falling behind us. So for bird on hands, I'm going to start lying on my back with my arms overhead. I'm going to think about externally rotating my shoulders, holding an imaginary stick and breaking it, and have my hands open and ready for the flyer.
Flyers, I'm stepping over the base, and here I have to straddle pretty far because I want my hips to get to their hands without me having to squat. So I'm straddling, their hands get to my hips. I place my hands, index fingers forward on their wrists, and then gently lean forward with a slight pike until I find a shelf on their hands. And then I'm lifting my toes and pushing into these wrists. And up here, flyers, in this shape, I'm squeezing my butt. I'm keeping the chest up a little bit and looking forward and just squeezing so my toes can be up.
Here, I'm thinking about pushing through an open hand. So I have a good amount of pressure in my fingers and my hand, but I'm not making a fist or grabbing. That can be very uncomfortable for the flyer.
And flyers, once you feel solid up here, you can remove your hands and just bring them out to the side, wherever that is. But making sure that we hold our shape and we aren't moving when we do this motion other than our arms. Flyers, in this position, we want to ensure we're not arching too much because we do want to have our belly pressing into the fingers of the base. This is how they're going to control where we're balanced. If we're arched too much, we might fall off their hands. So lean forward just a little bit, still holding that shape. To come down, we bring the hands back to the wrist, lower the feet to the floor, and stand up.
Once we're starting to feel comfortable with making the shape and balancing it on the hands, we can start talking about how to get the flyer overhead. Now, while you can definitely just muscle your way into this, it's a lot easier if you're using momentum and timing. So in order to really practice that timing, I like to start by practicing just lifting the flyer straight up and not starting to tilt them at all overhead. So we're going to start facing each other here, and I'm going to have my hands at the flyer's hip. This is not the grip that we're going to be using for the bird. This is just so that I can get a nice grip on their hips. A little detail here is that I have like this L of my hand on the flyer's hip. I'm not starting grabbing it already. I have the bottom of my hand pointing towards the floor and not the flyer's body. The reason for that is it allows me to be a little bit more upright as we start, and then as I squat, I'm able to transfer my whole hand onto the flyer's hip.
Flyers, we are going to grab the base's wrist with our pointer finger facing them. And I'm going to grip here, and as we go into this jump, I'm going to be pushing down into the wrists. And this is going to help stabilize, help the base be able to lift me up, and also just really make sure that this contact is secure here.
So she's thinking about jumping straight up, but as we jump, I'm actually going to be pulling the flyer just a little bit over my line. The reason for this is it's going to be similar to the bird, and it's also going to give me more power. Pushing something up in front of me is harder than getting something that's over on top of me. Another little detail here is by making sure that I bend enough and really focusing on trying to keep my elbow pretty close to the level of my shoulder as we get down here, I'm shortening the range of motion so that instead of like lifting the flyer from here all the way overhead, I'm going from like this position, and if you look at the angle of my elbow, it didn't really change. And then I really just need to extend my triceps in order to get the flyer overhead.
Yes, flyers. As Ben said, their bases are going to do this type of motion that is going to bring us over their head. So although we are jumping straight up, we are going to be kind of getting in this tilted position because of the base, and that's okay. And that's where pushing down on the arms is going to become extra important because that's going to help me keep my chest up and be able to protect me in this skill from going too far over. Flyers, the most important thing for this skill for the tempo is that we are bending and jumping in a predictable fashion. So we want to keep it slow and consistent so the base can read it so that they can step in and help as necessary.
As a base here, I'm really looking to follow her tempo. If I'm trying to rip her off the ground, I'm not going to have a lot of luck. And if she's already jumped and there's no tension in the system, I'm not really going to be able to add anything to her jump.
And last, flyers, it's really important to stay tight once you jump off the floor because the base is pushing into your body. And the tighter you are, the more they're going to be able to transfer that energy.
We're going to start working on the full standing bird now. Before we do that, I want to take a minute to talk a little bit about safety. So base and flyer individually can do a lot to keep this safe. So because the flyer has their hands on the base's wrists, they have some leverage in order to push themselves to the ground if needed. Bases, we have the ability to push our flyers back towards their feet. So because we're starting connected and we have these points of control, we should hopefully be able to do a lot to keep ourselves safe. However, we highly recommend working with the spotter the first time that you're doing this. So if we have our base here and our lovely flyer up here, as a base, as a spotter, I'm looking to be behind the base in a position where I can stop the flyer from falling towards their head. So this typically means getting a hand on their shoulder, or at the very least being kind of at the base's arms so that you can help push the flyer back towards their feet or stabilize if it's starting to go over. In a worst case scenario, you can step in and do what you need to in order to stop the flyer from falling on their head. Now we're ready to start working on the standing bird itself. So in terms of hand position, we already talked about where we want the hands to be on the flyer's hips, but similar to the drill we did with the tempo, I like to start with my palms facing the ground instead of the flyer's body. It allows for a more natural looking position. It allows us to be a little bit more dynamic as we jump and push. And then when we come to actually doing this in like a performative setting or on the dance floor, it looks a lot smoother if you're able to start standing like a normal human instead of like, okay, wait, here we go. So in order to find that position, we are going to kind of get down on our knees and refine where we want to be on the flyer's hips. And now we're going to kind of keep contact with the fingertips as we come up. And now we've kind of figured out where we want our hands to be. Similarly to the tempo, as we bend, I'm going to really focus on keeping my elbows roughly in line with my shoulders in order to keep that range of motion somewhat minimal and make it easier to do this lift. I'm making sure that I'm bending over at the waist in order to help facilitate this. And you can definitely take a bit of a lunge stance instead of a squat, particularly if you're taller. It's going to be a lot more comfortable of a position.
Flyers, this is very similar to the tempo we just did and the bird on floor. We're going to start with our hands on the base's wrist with the index finger pointing towards them. And in this skill, we're going to jump and give a slight lean towards the base as we jump off of the floor. And this is just to help them get the center of mass over their body. Once I'm doing that, once I'm bending and jumping, I'm thinking about pushing down through the base's wrists. And I'm doing that with a lot of intent because that's gonna really help the skill get up there and protect our bodies. So as I'm jumping, I'm pushing, I'm thinking about chest up and looking at the wall behind the base and just holding that tight bird shape so that the base can find the balance of the skill.
We're gonna ask that flyers keep their hands on the base's wrists the whole time for the first few reps that you do. And in general, you don't wanna be taking them off until you're confident that you're already in a stable position.
Flyers, for this first few skills, keep the hands here on the wrist just to help stabilize and protect. But once you feel solid in the skill and the balance has been found, then you can move the hands slowly away. To come down from this skill, flyers, I like to bring my hands back to the base's wrist, pushing down again.
From here, the flyer is gonna wait as I lower them towards me, and then we can come softly to the ground.
And flyers, as they're lowering me, I'm holding that shape and bringing my feet together just in preparation to land on the floor.
Often we see flyers really just trying to bring themselves to the ground and like use those hands to push back to vertical. That's just gonna result in a harder landing and it's gonna look less good. Some common base mistakes I see are having the hands too low as we're trying to lift up into the bird, and then you're having to muscle this range. It's still possible, but it's considerably harder. Another common mistake I see is bases really arching their back as they're starting to get the flyer over them. And that's gonna be less comfortable in general. And also it's going to really not help with that kind of press. So if you're starting in this position and you push and lean forward, it's actually a relatively short range of motion and you're using your chest in order to help stay under the center of mass. Whereas if you're leaning back, you have this longer lever and the flyer is gonna feel heavier. Again, it's possible, but it's a lot harder.
Also, I just want to mention there, from a flyer's perspective, there's a lot of movement happening underneath us. So as a flyer, I'm having to push a lot more into those wrists to find stability because of the additional movement that the base is doing. One of the common mistakes we see with flyers is just not being able to get their mass over the base enough. And this can come from a few things, such as not leaning enough when they jump or arching too much. Another common mistake we see is flyers pushing themselves away from the base instead of pushing down into the hands of the base. And then flyers, a lot of the mistakes we see come with the shape and the positioning of the body up here. So we might see flyers who are arching too much and not in the fingers enough of the base. Might see flyers who are piking. But really, we want to rely and lean into these fingers of the base so they can control our bodies.
Once these are starting to feel comfortable, you can start practicing without the hands on the base's wrists and even walking or running into it like they do in the Dirty Dancing movie. Another variation that you can start playing with is to have a little throw at the top from the base. You then catch with straight arms and by bending your legs to absorb a little bit. This has carry over to skills such as Jaegers, where you might be receiving in a bird, or any number of dance lifts where you might be throwing a flyer from a bird or catching them in a bird.
Flyers, for this skill, I'm still pushing down into the base's wrist, but right at the top before they release and pop us, I let go of the wrist and just hover my hands, just in case I need to bring them back quickly. As you get more comfortable, you'll be able to pull those hands away and have them in a more performing shape. But for this, just really make sure we're still using those hands, letting go at the top, and then as we catch, bringing them back.
Yeah.
Holding that shape in the whole time.
And it goes without saying, but start small with these and definitely consider working with the spotter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to support the channel and ensure that you get future videos from us. If there's things that you want to see us cover in the future, let us know in the comment section down below. See you next time.